Hello and welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons I have acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we discuss the appropriate lunch menu for a proper brainstorming session, the 5 sweetest words of the innovative process, and whether or not Mr. Edison is really just an overrated hack. Jim Weber, welcome back to Grody and Unprofessional. It is so good to have you in the studio here to talk about your experiences with innovation and really compare and contrast them with how I've experienced innovation in another company. There's no one single way to do it, but it does help to have someone who's calculating and considering and trying to figure out how it best applies in their organization. So it's so good to have you back.
Well, one unprofessional to another unprofessional, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
The first thing I want to wrestle with and first thing I want to discuss, Jim, how do you view brainstorming as a component of innovation within an organization that's trying to be innovative?
Let me take a short story into a long story. The world says, you have to have brainstorming sessions. I was part of a lot of brainstorming. In fact, I was in Shoreham, England, where a group that we were over that are trying to pick their brains hired a high-priced brainstorming company out of London to come down and run a brainstorming session. And by then I'd already had done some of my own, but this was an interesting pathway, how this was a high paid, it was not going well, let's just say. And I remember asking that group to leave the room while I asked the people from that company, what would you do if you were me? And I want you to tell me tomorrow morning, and I don't want you to group together. I want each one of you to tell what. So in a way, I just did a brainstorming session, and I separated it out because I want to know what you know. Mm-hmm. It was the most useful thing that was in the whole process. So all this other claptrap. Well, in the meantime, there were always people that says we ought to have a brainstorming sessions. And so I led a whole bunch of them, and they're all rather entertaining. That's the one thing you go like, well, that was fun. Yeah, but did it do any good? Right. In the entire time that I did brainstorming sessions and were part of them, I only know of one patent that was ever gotten out of that. It was mine. And I was sitting in some guys and I got an idea. And so I was like, well, that isn't exactly what I was hoping for in this. So my grade on brainstorming sessions are the way you think of them, there isn't going to get a very high grade. Right. Pulling everybody together. But
in one dedicated event and saying, okay, switch now, forget about all the processes we have you do every day of your life. Now, for one moment, just be creative. That doesn't work, Jim?
That's what the guys in London try to do to us. So no, and then the other one, they often try. Now we need to put them in order.
Yeah, of course.
Let's rank them. How many vote for 3? How many vote for? I was like, well, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
Because we all live in the same construct.
I'll vote for Bob's over there because that's how. Otherwise, I have to do it. And I don't really want to do that. Right. And so, I mean, it's complicated. The human interaction is complicated in this deal. So what I found to be, and I'm sure you'll resonate with it because you'll say, oh, this is classic Jim. The group that I had right outside my door, I have an idea. Slide out there on my wheels. Choom. Hey, guys, I got an idea. And they would all turn around, and we would participate in, how do I make this idea work? Yep. And the guy would say, well, you could do this, you can do this, and this, and this, and the guy was other guy. And the idea here is to find out where the flaws are. Right. And they played the part.
Break it as fast as possible.
They play the part, because along the way, a guy overheard this quiet all of us says, yeah, but you could do this, and that would get around that problem. And so eventually, everybody kind of dies off, and I roll back, and I know about everything that I need to know about this. They've already run me through it extremely fast. And by the way, it was both ways. Somebody have an idea, zoom, go right in there. Yeah. And so the idea that a brainstorming session works, yes, but it has to be a very specific way of doing it. And this was the specific way that I found was really, really worked. It really worked. You go in there, and then you take this idea and you go back and you further massage it with all this wonderful input from these very bright people who got the same idea. And then there's always carryover. The next day the guy comes in and says, the other thought, you do have an idea there that we might be able to do this or we might be able to do that. So you've really created the cauldron, the bubbles start coming out of the thing. So I think you probably are going to say, yeah, well, that's exactly the way it should be done. The rest of it, I have done lots of them. I mean, for HR, they thought everything was inventive. They have their nameplates.
Right.
But their nameplates for me were bananas and had their names on them. And I read on them. And after all, they could eat the banana because it's on it. Okay, so I'd like to show you the insane things that you try to make people more innovative. Doesn't work.
No.
Useless. Waste of time.
I think if you are attending a brainstorming session that was scheduled and lunch has been purchased, it's most likely not going to work.
It's not going to work. Come for the lunch, man. It's like, what are we having today?
Jimmy John's. Okay.
Whoa,
this is particularly innovative.
Cha-ching.
It's totally cliche. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to be cheeky. But brainstorming is more of a way of life than it is a moment in time.
Oh, well, I feel good about it. I'm being asked.
Correct. I got invited to the brainstorming session.
I got an opinion.
That's right. As I think about brainstorming, absolutely, the best ideas are vetted and filtered through lots of experiences, through lots of backgrounds, through lots of disciplines, through all these things. And young ideas are pretty ugly at the beginning, and they got to be reared and raised and punished, and they got to be sent in all these kind of different directions. For me, as I thought about the organization, there were a couple things that were very high on my list. Number one was the lack and the need for a lack of hierarchy, both organizational, like formal, and also informal hierarchy. For example, having an office is an unspoken hierarchy. You may have the same title, you may have the same pay. One person has an office, the other one doesn't. That's unspoken hierarchy. Parking spots, unspoken hierarchy. And so I was very, very intentional, and we're going to get into this in later episodes about comp structure and bonus structure and all those things. I was very intentional to have a flat organization. You can't pay everybody the same thing. This isn't a socialist structure, but to have a very, very flat organization, because what you pointed to, the best case scenario is when I loved when somebody came in and said, "Hey, last night I was thinking."
It's beautiful.
Oh, that's so awesome. Not because I'm trying to dominate your life, but because you feel that your energy is going to be used. What you come up with is going to be considered. Once you declare someone in your organization as the innovation manager, once that's their title, everybody else subconsciously says, "Oh, okay, they don't need me for it. I guess he's the one with all the ideas. Well, okay, Mr. Manager, give me your ideas.
Say something innovative.
Say something innovative," right? I was
been there on that one, by the way.
I was extremely conscientious, not to be manipulative, but to foster someone using their drive home, not to just mindlessly listen to talk radio, but to mindfully how would we solve that problem? Because they were invited into the room and they knew that no matter what salary they were, no matter how long they'd been in the organization, no matter what their background was, even somebody in purchasing or product support would come and say, "Hey, this weekend I was thinking about." That for me was like affirmation that we're doing this thing the right way. Because as I said, you can so easily have an organization that unspokenly assumes, well, Jim's the one with the ideas. Let's just wait for Jim to solve the problem.
I've had that problem. "Hey, smart guy, here, get us out of this one." And my comment was, "How in the hell did you get this thing stuck this far?"
How did we get this far in?
Holy cow, who in the heck was responsible for that? Okay, so to your point, little tangents on this thing. In my, we'll call it a skunk works. Yeah. Scott and Kim are the two guys that we built this with. I would have these ideas. I have a lot of ideas. I can't help you. It's just the way I am. Especially if I'm mowing.
Yes.
I go home and I mow. I got a nice mowing tractor, and I'm out there mowing, and I have like 5 acres to mow, and so I'm thinking all the time. And I get all these ideas on how we could improve this thing, which hasn't even been released yet. I got an idea, this idea. I would go in, and based on the content of that idea, I would talk to one of the 2 guys. So I'd go down, and in my enthusiastic and outgoing way, I would, hey, I got this idea. Of course, they always say, you've been mowing, haven't you? Yeah, I got mowing. And so I would tell this great idea. Okay, so to your point, 3 days later, they'd come down and say, Jim, you got a minute? Best words I've
100%.
ever heard. I'd walk down there, and he would show me, and he would all the time say, wow, that was a great idea you had. And I was like, I'm sitting there with that look you have on your face like, oh, yours is way better than mine.
Let's do that one.
That's, but all the time he's saying, oh, that's a great idea. And I was like, wow. So that was where I discovered the creativity that was buried in the organization, and that was being untapped, and trying to decide why these people were being constrained like this. And they're part of the constraint. In this particular group, I said they're very quiet, they're very constrained, they're very dutiful and all that sort of thing. But my Lord, the amount of creativity that they could exude with just a drip of some sort of encouragement in this thing.
I view creativity as one of the most precious and wasted assets of most organizations. It's so difficult to measure that the bean counters can't measure it, so it must not exist. You and I worked for a CEO that once said publicly, if it can't be measured, it doesn't exist. And creativity is a force multiplier, unlike most anything else. You can work twice as many hours and try to get twice as much done. Creativity is where we can work less and get 10 times as much done. But because of the way organizations are structured, because of the way failure is punished, because of the way you're the innovation manager, you're not the innovation manager, your idea is more important than this person's idea, because of how all that is structured, you have so much unmined creativity. I actually had a friend of mine, his executive, large company, and he had a very interesting measurement of utilized creativity. He was leading multi-site, and he went into a building, and this building was an engineering building, and he saw kit cars in the parking lot. So these are cars that you buy in a box, and you spend thousands and thousands of hours painting, designing, welding. And he actually said, we are not allowing you to be creative at work. You have all this creative juice that you have, and you have to deploy it on the weekend on a kit car. And he doesn't say that to be manipulative. He's not saying that in the sense of like, I want to own you. But in his mind, that is an example, a data point that could be used to say, man, we have so much untapped creativity that our people are having to deploy their creativity elsewhere to fill the need, to get the fulfillment, the joy of creation, because here they have to fit in the box. Here they have to do what they're told. For me, it was such an interesting lens of thinking of creativity as an asset. It's going to pour out somewhere.
He's not wrong.
Is it pouring out in the problems of the business, or is it pouring out elsewhere?
I don't know that he's totally right, but he's not wrong. Indeed, if there's not that avenue, some people, like myself, do that at home anyway.
Certainly.
I mean, it didn't make any difference what's going to happen. Because...
But you weren't doing it at home because it couldn't be done at work. You weren't doing it at home at the direct expense.
So a derivative of this doesn't really fit to your thing, but when I had this idea that turned out to be a rather impactful piece of software, which I believe 41 years later they're still using. So I had this idea, and so where does a guy go to figure this out? I quietly went home, wrote a 100-line basic program on my Apple IIe, hit the return button, and the answer was exactly what I'd hoped it would be. And I went, this works. So I did have to go back home.
Oh, certainly.
And so at the time, they would have said, you should have been able to do that at work. Well, it's not really their fault. There are those quiet cracks in your life.
But in your example, you were wrestling with a challenge of the business.
Absolutely.
And you felt empowered to be able to go tackle a problem of the business versus saying, for 2 years, I've told them we should try this. I can't get budget. I can't get approval. I can't get on this. I'm going to do this outside. And don't also hear me saying nobody should have hobbies. I really do appreciate the Winston Churchill quote that someone who works with their mind should hobby with their hands, and someone who works with their hands should hobby with their mind.
Good
so
comment.
I'm not removing hobbies from it, but it was just to say there is creativity that is untapped within an organization. And I think that there are a lot of organizations that don't even look to the rank and file, to use that term, as a source of creativity.
Major mistake.
For me, it was a passion. It was a conviction. It was what I spent my time wrestling with, is how do we take an organization as it grows and continue to tap the veins of creativity? It's somewhat easy when there's 4 people sitting inside of a cube. It becomes more challenging as there's 100 people sitting inside of one big room, and then 1,000 people spread across the continent of Europe. But it can't be solved the same way, but it was a conviction of mine. I view, this is a phrase that I used a lot, time and creativity are 2 of the most precious assets that this organization has. We should not waste either.
I can't argue against any of that, because the gold mine that I found that puzzled me to no end was something that I, for the rest of my career, said, I'm going to mine that. I'm going to find those. You recognize that there are constraints within the world that I lived in. I developed a process by which I could find these people.
Yeah.
You saw some of that, and it was interesting. I'd look at this and I said, look at that job description that they're looking for out there. Show it to some of the guys. See, it says we need a person to follow this, do this, like that. And I said, I just fell asleep halfway through it.
Once my buzzword bingo card was full, why was I still playing?
That's right. Then I go over and I said, here, let me put this one. Would you like to change the world? Now, I didn't quite go that far. I did say that to a guy who he was trying to decide whether he was going to work here. I said, do you want to change the world, or do you just want a job? And he came and he worked with me for a while, and he appeared to be just absolutely stunned by the whole process. Went off and created his own company, and he's got a company in Peoria still going strong. And another guy, the same thing. So we've created a couple of companies out of this idea of finding them and then encouraging them and then building them. The other thing is that because these people have desires, you can't tell them what to do. You find people that are really good at this, and then the other parts of the organization recognize, wow, that guy's really good. We got a job for him at another level. And I look at the guy and I said, hey, they just got offered. And there's so many managers said, well, you just can't let that guy go. Sure, we'll find more.
Sure.
I said, he wants that job. They just gave him promotion.
Let him have it.
Let him have it if he wants it. And boom, off he goes. From my stingy standpoint, I want to infect the organization with these kinds of people, so the more that I can create, maybe one of them will actually slither through and
make it to the top.
Make it to the top. So I'm sitting there throwing seeds out. I'm like a tree throwing out these seeds. Maybe they'll get through this mess.
The other thing, as I thought about an organization that is tapped into its creativity, whether you call it brainstorming, whatever you call it, we were conscientious to have the collection forum of ideas and the deciding forum of ideas be different, right? You highlighted this brainstorming session where we're going to schedule it from noon to 4, and we're going to buy lunch, and we're going to do this. And you try to solve the whole problem with everybody in observation. So you have the collection event. Everybody post-it notes or whatever. We're going to throw ideas against the wall. Then we're going to, while you're at lunch eating your Jimmy John's box lunch, we're going to type them into a spreadsheet. And then in the afternoon, we're going to vote.
Oh, I've seen that.
It's the recipe.
What, were you and I at that one?
That's right. Same one. It's a horrible recipe because there's a couple reasons. One, candidly and bluntly, most ideas are bad ideas in any given brainstorming session. And why? It's because the person doesn't have the experience, the person doesn't have the context, the person doesn't have this. I don't care that it's a bad idea. I'm trying to create a creative person. And if my daughter is 6 years old and she can't ride her bike without the training wheels on, I'm not going to say, she's a horrible bike rider. What am I going to do? It's okay, honey. Let's get back on. Let me hold it. You can do this. So the collection of ideas, a lot of the ideas aren't great ideas, but I don't want that person to know that it's not a great idea. Counterpoint, I'm not just going to receive all of the ideas unfiltered, because the person who doesn't have a great idea doesn't get better at coming up with ideas. There's a vetting process. There's a conversation process. Not that I kill the idea in front of them, but I'm going to work and refine the idea. So a person comes in, brand new engineer, just came out of college. We're wrestling with this thing. I want them at the table. I want them to feel equal at the table. I want them to come up with ideas. It's easy as the bitter old engineer to be like, yeah, I remember when I thought that would work. That's a horrible thing. Run that guy out of here. But you don't just say, oh, that's a great idea. You do vet it a little bit. That meeting ends with all the ideas on the page. All the people that contributed ideas, they go out thinking, they care about my ideas. I got to sit at the table. I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. I love making ideas. You then have the next conversation, which is a smaller subset of people, not where you're blasting the individuals that made the ideas, but you're vetting and actually doing some of the prioritization and saying, okay, within these ideas, which one are we going to work on? The other part that you touched on that is my massive, massive, massive pet peeve is, since I have Excel, and since Excel is numbers, and since I'm an engineer and engineers are numbers, we're going to rank them. I hate it. I 1,000% hate it. And here's why. One, the world changes. The industry changes. Competitors change. Your technology changes. Other people's technology changes. And so if you make the event by which the numbers are placed on the scroll a hallowed moment,
yes,
the reality is I need to change them tomorrow. When Moses came down with the 10 commandments, it was to say, these will not change. These 10, for the rest of time, they're stuck. We should not do that with a priority list. We should have the willingness and the ability to say, here's what we think today. Tomorrow might be different. When we went from the idea collection phase to the idea vetting phase, one, we had a different audience. We had a more discerning audience that was in charge of trying to execute on these things. But we held all of those prioritizations with an open hand. Warren Buffett says, in order to be a good investor, you have to make 2 good decisions. The day that you should buy and the day that you should sell. You can't be a good investor by only making one good decision. And so we viewed brainstorming and prioritization and pipeline and all the picking, we viewed it the same as Warren Buffett did. I have to make a good decision today of what are we going to do, and I have to make a good decision tomorrow of what are we going to stop. And as organizations get bigger, there's momentum and there's inertia and there's all these things. You can't be schizophrenic, but it was to say, what I just really riled at is the thought that somehow the 6 brains are going to come up with the 10 priorities, and we're going to be held accountable to those 10 priorities, even though tomorrow the entire world changes and we don't even have a category of reconsidering that we've learned a new thing since we prioritized what number 1, number 17, and number 19 were.
Interesting. You have a kind of a democratization process. They're going there. I have to admit that I was pretty much a lone ranger.
Correct.
You probably knew that. And as I just told you, I found ways of getting the other people to participate. But one of the steps in my sauce, in my script, my recipe, is doing what you did, but I had to do it myself, was I talked to everyone.
Yes.
I literally talked to everybody. Usually the question, if it required it, was, what would you do? And that always drops the correlators, the resistance. Well, this is what I would do, or this is what... In doing so, you find out very quickly what the essence of everything is and how big a problem we got in front of us, what's the opportunities. From my standpoint, the part that is unfortunate is there's probably just one guy always doing this. Mm-hmm. But I found that in our organization that we had, that if you left it to a wider variety, it might get processed out of
Correct.
the system.
A point of clarity this collection process was not a formal process. There were a few times in the 10 years that I was there where we would schedule a meeting and say, man, we are in a pickle. We do want people to focus for an hour that aren't working on this project. But 99% of this collection process was exactly as I observed you doing it, which is to wheel your chair up to someone's desk and say, hey, I'm thinking about a thing, and I want to get your thoughts on those things. I don't want to convey it as if there was this like bring all the ideas together in this very formal process and then vet them in this very formal process. It was far more informal than that, but it was to say my goal was that a young engineer went home excited to wrestle with the problem because he was excited that his idea was going to be considered as part of it. And you have to kind of teach over time that, hey, ideas to execution, if you're 2%, you're doing great. So the fact that you have an idea, that's a win. It doesn't require that your idea actually becomes the thing that gets done in order for you to be the winner in contributing ideas to the neural net, if you will, of the organization.
Good. When I had this idea for this software project, now you have to understand, Caterpillar doesn't sell software. So I wasn't working on the prime product.
The flagship.
I was working on some secondary, it was Tina Turner, what's innovation, just a second-hand emotion. So I was working software, same thing, second-hand emotion. When the idea finally vetted out in my mind, and I needed to have at least some people help me with this because the magnitude of this particular project was going to change the temper of the entire engineering world because we were now going to be able to simulate everything.
Yeah.
By the way, this was the most blessed project ever anywhere on the planet. So I find this engineer who is like the greatest engineer I've ever met, Scott. It's just incredible. And he'd already had some elements of something that was like, oh, we can build off of that. This is great. So immediately I find this guy that has creativity, but no one knows. And then I had a trainee, and he was just getting out of the college graduate training program. And I want him. His very first job was to put out this program that's been here for 41 years. Talk about an exciting time for both of them. To your point, I had a veteran and I had a rookie. And the rookie performed flawlessly. And one day he said something that caught me off guard. We were talking about promotions. It wasn't just promotions. It was talking about the company. And he said, I fear I've had the best job I'll ever have. I didn't know what to say. I went, well, why? Gee, he didn't. He got some more. Got some good. But it was a fun ride. Yeah. And it was pure innovation. I'm using the word innovation now. Came out of nowhere. And it supported everything that I ever wanted to do. I had a boss that he once says, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. And then I got to work with one of the greatest engineers, once again, very quiet. Over here, I got this young guy who's probably going to take over the company. And these guys are really good. And all you have to do is give them a little bit of, and they're going to give you awesome stuff, man.
Well, I want to move now to the environment. When you think about a culture or an environment that breeds or fosters innovation, what are some of the ingredients that you found that do bring not just yourself, but others into an innovative thought process or an innovative spirit? And if there is a secret sauce, go ahead and share it.
Okay, why don't I just go through the secret sauce and then along the line you can just pick it up. By the way, most people, when I tell them about the secret sauce, fall asleep.
Okay. So if you're driving late at night.
It's so underwhelming. Yes. So anybody out there driving, you might no dose. Because it's like, well, duh. This is about where it's at. Leading into this, there is this question which has not been brought up here. So are you an innovator or are you the fix-it guy?
Right.
And that really is a question which I finally have to say yes, depending on the day.
Sure.
Because not in any way having any ego, I have often said I'm a handy guy to have around. And that's because I have this huge, broad interest to go across art and music and all that stuff, and physics and all that stuff. So I have a broad view of things. And so am I the fix-it guy or am I the innovator? And I can say, yeah, when we did the original software, that was innovation. And I was the innovator, along with the other two guys. I'm giving them all credit in the world. These guys they're magnificent. Some of the other things down the road, I was just the fix-it guy. So what's the first thing you do, Jim? Well, if I'm the fix-it guy, it's not a whole lot different than being the innovator. I go ask everybody everything.
Right.
And try to figure out what they know. Because I have this thought, and it's going to sound personal, but if I know what you know, and I know what everybody else in the room knows, it makes me the smartest guy in the room.
Right.
Now that sounds like, well, that's kind of a big-headed. No, that the point is, you need to know everything, how we're going to solve this problem. And so asking everybody, and when I say ask everybody, most people would say, yeah, well, I asked all the guys around me. I said, I even asked the overlords. You're a vice president or president or what would you do? And they're like, well, it's why you're here. No, I don't know. What do you think is going to happen? What should we do? What do you expect? And you take it down, and they're shocked. And then you go the next afternoon, you're talking to the lab technician out there. Well, what would you do? What have you seen? And I was once commented that a guy said, you talk to the president in the morning and you're talking to the technician out there in the afternoon. I said, how in the hell do you know what's going on?
Right.
Back to your level the whole thing down, and you're going like, nobody has any expertise beyond any of this in here, so let's find out what it is. In
this situation, in this trial that is emerging, you're right. You don't know. Nobody's lived there before.
I just talk. I just ask. And not only that, it's a part that I came to hate.
Okay.
Why did you hate it? Because you embarrass yourself. Because you'll ask something of a guy, and he'll go like, well, you stupid idiot. And you're going like, you just don't understand what I'm doing here. I have to throw out a stupid idea, and you go, well, that won't work. For crying out loud, you see there.
And what would you do?
Yeah, and what would you do?
Right.
So why did I hate it? Because it always embarrassed. I was always embarrassing myself, asking somebody some really complicated question, and he's looking at you like, well, you don't know that?
Right.
Well, anyway.
Especially within an organization that demeans or destroys the idea of I don't know.
Most of these were the engineers.
Right. There's a lot of organizations where you can't answer I don't know. You can't answer I'll figure it out. Going around the organization and essentially freely admitting that you don't know is, at least in your mind, that that's the path to the answer. That's the way that we get there. But as you said, you're putting yourself at risk of what other people think about the situation.
So now I've embarrassed myself. But I now know, now I'm the smartest guy in the room.
Right.
I understand this correctly. I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy, but for this topic, I know everybody's view. And not only that, you learn that the problem is not just technical.
Correct.
You look at it and said, this group thinks this. So if I launched, what would we do? Because this person's not going to buy into it. So you suddenly widen the challenge to include what can the organization do? How can you get the old boy to dance? How do you do that? Because if you consider just the technical part of it, you might create something that they go like, oh, we don't know how to do that, or we don't know how to do that. So now you're sitting there with other constraints. But if you don't include these in this whole thing, and this is, I think, a mistake that a lot of people, especially engineers, do, this will work. But they don't understand that maybe they have to get look up the process of how do you get the parts for this? Do we do this before? Have we ever made one of these before?
Right.
What's the reliability of it? Stuff like that. So having gone through one of these, you eventually widen the thought process to the collective of the technical and all of the administrative and the overlords and the engineers, and like, so what would they maybe buy into?
And I would say from our experiences, my experience of leading an organization tasked with innovation, your experience leading not a formal organization, but an informal collective of people tasked with innovation, you had a much higher hill to climb in that space. And it had to do not with just the size, but the age of the organization. For me, our company was 200 people, 500 people. We could pretty much pull everybody into a room within 20 or 30 minutes to decide, can we do that? Who would do that? How does that happen? For you, it was a much more artful exercise. And as you've highlighted multiple times, there were maybe more egos at play as well that you had to caress and massage to get them to dance the right way.
May I say I'm envious of you right now?
You should be.
And good for you, by the way. It's the way it should be. To that end, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And once again, I want to say it was a very successful company and that they have been able to be continued successful, and good for them.
Yeah.
But in those moments, they would say, well, you did what we wanted you to do. We don't know what that is, but you did what we wanted you to do. Here's the Jimmy John, and we'll eat that and go on. So that's the first part.
Yeah.
The second part is the one where everybody just does not like to hear. Simulation. I didn't even want to work on a project that I couldn't simulate.
Sure.
Doesn't mean that it was obvious how to simulate it.
Right.
But remember, I was a progenitor of a simulation program which put together all of the mechanical, electrical, hydraulic type of things. And to me, everything else, you're just guessing. See, you're doing it right now. You've dozed off. Everybody should know. He's looking down. He's like, "Oh yeah, simulation. Whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Move on. This is one of the critical points, and everybody just goes, "Oh, that's nice. That's wonderful." We have an analyst department where they go over and run it through some simulation. I don't know what it is. Well, that speaks to the organizational difficulties that I always had a problem with. When we created this program, the first one, the hope was, this is me now, I wanted the thousands of engineers at this large company to be able to have it on their desktop and be able to simulate everything they did to be able to simulate. Did I succeed? No. Did I improve the situation? Yes.
Absolutely.
Or we improved the situation? Yes, quite a bit. We went from like individual hot spots of simulation out there to a group that basically was the Simulation Central, which had like 3 engineers in it. So you're looking across this massive organization, and there's only a handful of people that are actually doing simulation on a continuing basis. They'd pop up every once in a while. And so, we got into hundreds, maybe up to 1,000.
And I would tell you, from your first episode that you recorded of Grody and Unprofessional, there were multiple engineers at that company that sent me notes that I'm friends with that said, I've seen his name in code before. I've never talked to the guy. So you are correct. The software is still being used across the company.
Yep.
Your name is still buried in the comments in certain places of the code.
Should be. Anyway, it's funny that everybody thinks of me in the latter part and the accomplishments we made. The part that people don't recognize was we simulated what the answer was. And when we ran that machine the first time, the answers were raw spot on, and the software I used was the ones that we developed. So I passed myself the ball.
Yeah.
So I'm here, and I know everybody's dozed off. Oh, simulation. We have an analyst group. I don't want the world to think of it as analysts. I want to say you need to be, by the way, I don't like the word simulation, but you got a better one. All of that.
That's great.
Predictive or whatever it is. I don't really like it. But the idea that you need to be able to take we spent a lot. This goes back to Newton, man. This guy was pretty sharp. And Maxwell with his equations and electronics. We put together, and you don't have to use what I made or what we created, but it's somewhere along the line, you have got to figure out, is this idea a thought? Now, the other people says, well, we'll test it. And I go, in the old days, this wasn't a really good idea. That's 3 years out. You know. Then they got the rapid prototyping. I'm all for rapid prototyping.
Yep.
Like I told you, I have a 3D printer and stuff like that I had to make. What I combine this with is the simulation. Then occasionally we'll have to run off and run a piece of data, a very short data, to find out, well, what does that component do? The good news for the people who went through this whole thing is that all of the little groups within this large company created these library of all these parts, and so now we're all standing on the legacy, which is unbelievable. That all that you're going like, wow, this is a pretty nice thing to have somebody hand that to you. These people took their whole careers building subroutines and libraries that you can actually say, and that component's going to work like that, and that engine's going to work like that. It's like, wow, this is pretty powerful stuff. So my last decree: please use simulation. I don't care how hard you think it is. It can even be a spreadsheet. And now that everybody relaxed at that point.
Okay, good. We
I
get to
can
use
use
the
a spreadsheet.
real.
Move on, Jim. All right. So
I want to dovetail there.
please, I'm not done, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that there's some context. I think that there's some environmental factors that play into that experience, that play into the passion, the conviction, and I think the right application of simulation in being in your recipe. I was at that company. I was in the research group, and I remember the division manager standing up and declaring, "We don't do Edisonian research." And I remember thinking, okay, I need to figure out what that means, because I kind of thought Edison was good at his job. I mean, kind of gets listed as one of the best inventors. Not here, not at this company. We don't do Edisonian research. And what he was pointing to is that Edison was an iterator. Edison was a tester. Edison was a fail fast guy. I don't know the number. We could look it up, but it wasn't the first attempt at the incandescent light bulb that worked. It was not the 100th attempt. It was the 1,000th attempt that made it. His point was, we're going to simulate and we're going to find the answer before we test. Here's my point. We were wrestling with diesel engines. We were wrestling with hydraulic systems that were in their 50th and 100th year of being optimized. The diesel engine is the most optimized machine in human history. It takes 3 years and $100 million to make a 1% improvement. Don't guess. Figure out the answer. Don't guess. When I moved to precision planting, it's a very different environment. We aren't regulated to the molecule of exhaust that is coming out the tailpipe of this thing. We aren't using $100 million development projects that require 3 years and 1,000 engineers. And if you're off by a little bit, it all gets thrown away and the competition steps ahead. I actually was part of building an innovation organization that absolutely embraced Edisonian research. And the reason that we were able to do that, I believe, is because, one, the products that we were developing could be done in their entirety by 2 or 3 engineers. And those engineers were sitting in the same room with each other. 2, our cost structure was so significantly lower. The reason Edison can run through 50 iterations of the incandescent light bulb in one day is because it's him and Watson. And they're just, well, let's try horsehair. Well, let's try this. I found a moth in the basement. Put him in. Let's see if it'll light up. If you keep your cost structure low, and if you're the first person ever to do it, throwing darts at a wall is actually a fairly effective method. I don't think that diesel engines in 2015 was anywhere in that. But as we went to precision planting, we built the organization around speed to iteration. I wanted an engineer that had an idea on the way to work about a product to put the blinker on, pull into Menards, swipe the credit card, and fail at it in the field, which literally was behind our building, by 8:30 in the morning. I wanted to hear about your failure before I heard about your idea. So what have we tried? When did it break? How did it break? That fed through into the organization, creativity and time being the most precious assets. Most big organizations, they have a 3D printer. You can use it if you have a charge number. No, creativity and time are our most precious asset. We had 3D printers that sat in the room. I wanted a guy to be able to choose to print in 2D on the page printer or in 3D with the same level of speed. What was the utilization of our 3D printers? Don't know, don't care. It was all about getting the cost of iteration and the speed of iteration as low as possible. We had products that it took 50 iterations. And the moment I saw the very first derivative of the product, the first concept, the glue and paste version of it, it's like, that's going to take 100 iterations. It's going to take 100 iterations to get there. If I can iterate once a day, I'll be done in 3 months. If it takes me a week to iterate, I'll be done in 2 years. If it takes me a month to iterate, it'll take me a decade. I'm not debating the value of simulation in certain environments, but it was something that we did not lean first to simulation because I think we were more in a market and a category and a season in which Edisonian research actually was as or more effective than a simulation first. So you fell asleep during that part. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, actually, yeah, I did. No. So first of all, I'm envious.
Sure.
We didn't have 3D printers back when I was working with my dad. He would appreciate what you did. What it speaks to, and no pun intended, is a fertile ground.
Correct.
Where nuances and changes can really
that's right.
bubble up.
And that's where we don't get to necessarily pick the ground that we have to be innovative in.
No, in fact, you have to, right. I would wonder aloud if simulation couldn't have even shortened that if you had people that had this. Let's use the word Dave, because his name's Dave. He is really good at simulating things.
Sure.
With that tool that was created many years ago by some unknown guy, at Guys, he might have been able to whip one out and said, not only that, if you did this, so you're changing the dynamic, looking at the physics of the whole thing.
Right.
My dad got to come to an open house
Awesome.
at Caterpillar, and he got to see Dynasty. And he sat there, and this guy's really out of place. Let's just put it this way. He's sitting there, and I'm showing him what Dynasty can do. He looks at me, and he says, this is real engineering. What I do is cut and try. So here's a guy that immediately saw what the potential and the power of this is. Mm-hmm. Now, no way would I suggest you change your ways, because I'm a person that can sort of understand what you're talking about. But I am committed to, if it is something that's amenable to any type of physics, if you don't do a simulation, you may not completely grasp. And I recognize that if the thing broke or whatever it is, the old style is just make it bigger or thicker or whatever. And if that works, good enough. If it works, great, good for you.
And I don't want to convey that we abandon all simulation. It was just, what leg do you lead with? The point that you make is extremely valid. I do not think that our strategy would have worked in Tier 4 emissions at all. It would have been a horrible strategy to send 200 engineers in their favorite direction to solve Tier 4 emissions by just trying stuff. I'm not proposing that whatsoever. And that's where, even within innovation, like we said, you don't get to pick the field necessarily that you're trying to cultivate innovation in. And I view it like different approaches have to be taken in the stage of the business, the size of the business, the stage of the technology, the stage of the market. What that does lend itself to, however, in some senses, why businesses struggle to move beyond their given market. Because we have a recipe of innovation here, and this is how we do innovation. You may end up moving to a near market that feels a lot the same, mostly because it has the same customer, but it's the technology that's being used in that near market is in a different stage or a different style. And so I don't propose at all that every organization globally should go to Edisonian research. It was just to say that for us, when we looked at the technologies that we were bringing to the market and the speed at which we could bring them to market.
This is my dad's process.
No, it's 100%.
All over again.
It's 100%.
He would relate to this. He'd say, that's what I do. This is how we do
Totally.
it. And he would look at me right now and say, what do you want to stimulate this for? Because he says, I can just whip this thing out. I can do this thing.
Right.
And I went, congratulations. Good for you guys.
I think the farmer and the cowman can be friends.
I think so. I think
that both can exist. It was such a different environment. We were able to use a different recipe.
Now, the next part of the whole thing is you got to somehow, now we're in your realm. Now I got to test it.
Yeah.
And along the way, during the simulation, I may have to run a test because there's just no known way of knowing what the data is. The temperatures go up and down outside. The sun comes in, goes out, or whatever. So there needs to be some very specific tests along the way so that you can understand the complete device or complete idea. That's how you get to the point that says, now I need to make it and go as fast as you can to prove it out. And then you have to move into a phase of the validation and then they actually get it into production.
Yeah.
And once again, during that process, I use the word simulation because when you get to the Edisonian, and I recognize that yours was really well done probably because of you. Go stop it. One of the problems was that if you follow the script of test, it will be what you said. It'll be 2 years. It'll be a year. But if you really want to get out the door in a short amount of time because of the marketing, you better figure out how to combine your simulation and your test
Certainly.
into a composite of the supportive nature of the two things, as opposed to each individual, like, well, I can test my way out. And not everybody's going to trust that simulation, which speaks to the fact that I'm not completely sure why, but there are some that do this really well, and other people, maybe they're too skeptical or something, but they don't relate to it quite as... So I personally hire for somebody who's going to be able to do some sort of simulation, and it can be a broad base, including spreadsheets.
Excellent.
I'm letting everybody, oh, thank God. Thank God I can do a spreadsheet.
Awesome. Jim, as we wrap up here, it's so good, as I said, to sit down and talk about your experiences with innovation and really compare and contrast them with how I've experienced innovation in another company. As we've seen in previous episodes, there's no one single way to do it, but it does help to have someone who's calculating and considering and trying to figure out how it best applies in their organization. So I'm super excited to continue this conversation. We'll see you next episode.
Well, thank you for having me.
For those that wish to share praise, feedback, accolades, or large sums of money, please reach out to justin@grody.io. For those with complaints, concerns, frustrations, or accusations, or if you consider me a simple afternoon farmer, feel free to schedule some time on my calendar to discuss. Please check with my assistant for my office hours. I usually bunch my complaint meetings near the end of the decade. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.